Pearsall. I'm the conservation officer for the town of Hingham, and tonight we are starting our hearings with a joint meeting with the Planning Board and Conservation Commission to chat about the Hingham Climate Change, Vulnerability, Risk Assessment, and Adaptation Study. It's kind of a mouthful. Primarily, I'm going to turn our presentation over to our consultant, Andre Martachini from Kleinfelder, but I just wanted to give kind of a brief project overview. What we are looking at doing as a town is working through Kleinfelder to identify municipal infrastructure and facilities likely to be affected by sea level rise and climate change. This is not a project that is specifically related to the FEMA mapping project, so these are a little bit different, and if folks have questions about those another time, we can certainly answer that. But again, the goal of this project is to define degrees of impact in vulnerable areas, to develop recommended strategies for managing those vulnerabilities, and look at infrastructure facilities and natural resources so that we look at Hingham's resiliency to climate change over the long term. We have a presentation tonight that's got some room for slides as well as questions. We do need to wrap up this portion of our meeting at 7:30. So if there are folks who wind up having questions, or if there are people at home who want to ask questions, you can certainly get in touch with the Conservation Office and I can help you through finding those answers. So with that, I will turn it over to Andre.
Thank you, Abby. My name is Andre Martachini with Kleinfelder. We're up in the Cambridge area. I happen to be a resident of Duxbury, so a South Shore resident myself. So we're going to, as Abby mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about what a lot of people are talking about resiliency. And resiliency, one definition, there are many of them, but is the ability of a system, in this case municipal infrastructure, to withstand a major disruption within acceptable degradation parameters, and then to be able to recover within an acceptable time, and at the same time to balance costs and risks. So the challenges that you here in Hingham are having are against long-term, and what our project is focusing on is long-term sea level rise, storm surge, and intense storm events. As well as how to maintain your operational capabilities, and again, as we mentioned, balancing costs and risks. So just to sort of set the table a little bit, many people are, say, hurricanes, they don't happen here very often. And that's true, they don't. We're fairly lucky that we haven't had any major hurricanes, but yet, if you look at this little chart here, the yellow, we've had 13 Category 1 hurricanes in about the last 155 years. And the return rate is about 13 every one, is 8% probability of occurrence annually. And similarly, we've had 8 Category 2s and 2 Category 3s. So again, not very common, but yet we can have them. And so this is what you're really looking at here. So the town of Hingham, through Abby's work and others, put together a grant request for CZM, Coastal Zone Management, Massachusetts, and they were, put together a good proposal, and they were one of 9 people, one of 9 municipalities that were awarded grants, totaling about $1 million. And the grant amount that you received is about $44,000, of which the town is matching 25% in-kind services. So you didn't have to put out cash, which is always nice. And then, as Abby mentioned, we went through a selection process and we were hired to do the work. So I just wanted to kind of go over a little bit of the objectives. So basically, as we mentioned, we're going to look at what are the appropriate sea level rise and storm surge scenarios to look at. Also, we want to understand the vulnerability to municipal infrastructure. And I want to emphasize municipal because there are lots of assets out there. They're private, they're commercial, they're residential. This project is going to focus on your municipal assets. Now, having said that, we are going to produce maps and tools that you will be able to see lots of other private and commercial, how they are affected, but we're not going to be looking at adaptation strategies for them. So I just want to make that perfectly clear. And as we mentioned, we're going to look at some short, mid, and long-term strategies, which may involve some various approaches. We're going to look at some high-quality maps and graphics that will be able to be used. And a very important part of this, of which this is the second meeting of part of our public outreach, the first being the Selectmen's meeting a few weeks ago. We're going to be wanting to make sure that what we come up with here, both from the results and the vulnerability and the adaptation strategies, is communicated out to the public, because it's very important for them to understand, because later on they're going to be voting on probably the capital improvement programs to actually fund some of these. What I want to emphasize, that this project has nothing to do with FEMA flood mapping nor flood insurance rates. And I know this is going to be very confusing to some. We're going to be doing a lot of things that are very similar, but we are not going to be producing flood maps, and we are not doing anything related to insurance. Okay? So let's just, I just want to kind of describe how we're going to approach it, the project. So it's kind of a three-phase approach. The first being what we're calling having to understand what are we studying, basically, the scenarios that we're looking at. Phase two is going to be actually doing the modeling, and then looking at, once we get the model results, then looking at the vulnerabilities. And then phase three is adaptation. And of course, public outreach I list as phase three, but it's ongoing throughout the whole process. So for phase one, which is the study parameters, we're going to be looking at the choice of sea level rise and storm surge model. What kind of modeling techniques are we going to use? We're going to look at different storms and storm climatology. Basically, we are going to be focusing on hurricanes and nor'easters. Some model types only can focus on hurricanes. The model that we're ending up using is a very sophisticated model and can actually incorporate hurricanes and nor'easters. We'll be looking at different sea level scenarios, and we have a steering committee that's already selected, and I'll go through that a little bit. What planning horizons to look at? That's important to understand. And then what are the output results? So in order to understand what's vulnerable, we have to first come up with a model. Now, we are using a model. Woods Hole Group is a very well-known oceanography firm, and they are our subconsultants to do the actual modeling. They're involved today in doing a very detailed model. It's called the Boston Harbor model, and it's part of, it was commissioned by Mass DOT, Mass Highway Department, to study in the black there. I don't know if you can see it here. This is too faint. But those black lines in the middle of the Boston Harbor, that's the central artery system. They're very worried about how vulnerable they are with all the tunnels and infrastructure that they have. So they have this very detailed model. That squiggly blue line all the way around, that's the limit of the model. So, and we are lucky that Hingham is right as part of that model. So when you look at, this is looking, say, at the shipyard area of Hingham, an aerial, and what this model does, it creates a mesh, a very fine mesh, and it varies. Out in the open water, the mesh is greater. When you get onto shore, it's a smaller, tighter mesh. Each one of those little nodules creates data. So when we create this model and take surge and storm heights and sea level rise, you can basically propagate these. So as a wave goes through, it goes through one node to the other node, and you can get the maximums, you can get all kinds of things. So this is the basis of this model. So it's actually quite detailed. Now, as part of this model extends all the way from up our neck of the woods up in the northeast, but it also goes all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. It's an entire coastal model. And the model includes hundreds and various climatology effects. So you take all of this, and now based on that, we can now go to a very risk-based model because there's so many events in there. It includes tides, it includes currents, it includes obviously the different storm events. So you can really look at it and say, what's the probability that something's going to happen? And again, I don't want to get too much into this because we don't have a lot of time. But so basically, it's a very sophisticated approach. It looks into part of the upland that mesh, it goes on the land, because as storm surge comes in and waves come in on shore, that takes into account the friction. So if it's going over paved parking areas, it has one property. If it's going through the woods, it's another. If it's going through marsh, and so on. So basically, each one of those little nodes there, each one of those has a different characteristics representing what's the underlying area there. So it includes winds, wave run-up, all kinds of things. So it's a pretty sophisticated model. When we talk about sea level rise, and this is always, and I don't want to get into today into a lot of the details about this because we don't have time, but suffice it to say, NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, they have published and this is really what pretty much all of these studies are pretty much being based on today. So we don't want to deviate. We don't want to be, taking any wild, deviation. So we're using one of these curves. We had, debate within our own steering committee here, and what we're ending up because this is a planning model, we are going with the highest curve. That's what's being modeled at different different years. So as we look at the planning horizons, we're looking at 3 different horizons. One is 2015, which is basically now. It's next year when we're actually finishing the report. So that's what we're calling the present year. So that's sort of your baseline. This is what's happening today. 2030, 15 years out, it's, from municipal, I was a selectman for 12 years, so I kind of understand how difficult it is to, especially longer term projects. It takes time to get them to come to fruition. So 15 years out is not necessarily a bad shorter term planning scenario. Then we go to 2070, which is 55 years out. And we could have gone to 2100, but we felt that was a little too far out, and it sort of exceeds the life of most of your infrastructure. So most of your infrastructure between now and 55 years from now, that's a good planning horizon. Beyond that, as you saw, the various sea level rise components, curves there, they start to deviate a lot. So, as you get farther out, the reliability of the data gets a lot less. So we think that the 2070 is a good scenario. So phase 2, and by the way, we're done with phase 1. We have the summary memo of all that, and I believe that's going to be on your website. Right. Phase 2 is where we're in the modeling phase right now. We're getting the models results for Hingham. And again, we're looking at the sea level rise and storm surge. We have some risk-based maps that we're going to be producing. We're going to be looking at 3 selected areas, which the committee hasn't determined yet. Once we see where the flooding is occurring, then we'll come back and maybe pick out 3 different areas that are of somewhat more concern to the town. And then we're going to do some photorealistic modeling of at least one scenario in each there. And again, we're looking at municipal infrastructure and natural resources. So your beaches, marshes, maybe some aquaculture, and whatever, we'll see what's impacted. And again, this is just based on the FEMA, the FEMA flood maps. These are your areas that in the kind of purple area up on top there. Those are your typical flood areas today. And so that's certainly where we're going to start with, but we'll see whatever the flood models do come out with. When I talked about risk-based scenarios modeling, the concept of risk is that you're looking at, and think of it, when we think of a rain event. You hear on the radio, oh, it's a 50% chance of rain today. Well, that's a pretty good chance that it's going to rain. If somebody were to say to you, you have a 50% chance that water is going to be at some level, that's a pretty good chance. So we will have at every one of those little nodes is going to have basically a curve developed, which will be able to show what are the various percentage chance, the probability that water is going to be exceeding a level of that. And that takes into account tide, that takes into account the storm surge, that takes into account the sea level rise. And you'll be able to do that in 2030, 2070, and in the present year. Yes?
Can I just ask a
Sure.
question? This is surge in water from the ocean basin coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Does this also represent the drainage and the flow out from the fresh water from the land area?
In
Yeah.
this case, it can, but it will not.
Okay.
It is being taken into account for the Boston model, where, for instance, on the Charles River, that entire Charles River basin has curves, precipitation curves, hydraulic curves, that are coming downstream and meeting the storm surge. So the whole dam effects and all of that. But we're not doing that for this here. Right, correct. So if you have, for instance, a vulnerable piece, an asset, whatever that may be, a pump station, you can go in and say at what level, what's the probability that I'm going to have water at a certain level in 2030. And that helps you, that kind of helps with that vulnerability. Because you may have water coming into a building, but if all of the electric panels are 3 feet above the floor, maybe it can take 2 feet of water coming in, and it's not so bad. So that's the concept of risk. So in terms of the output displays that we're going to be giving you, so for for the present, 2030 and 2070, we're going to be looking at water depths at mean high or high water, which is basically your daily high tide. There are 2 tides in a day, mean high water and mean higher high water. It's the higher of the 2 tidal cycles, without any surge. So this is basically going to be looking at, on an everyday occurrence, where is my water going to be? Because, storm surge, when you think about it, storms are massive events that you deal with. We deal with it today. Hurricane Sandy blows in, the city of New York. As painful as it is, you deal with it, it's over. On a tidal basis, you can't do that. If it's twice a day coming up, that's what you have to now deal with that. So that's going to be important charts. We'll be looking at water depths at 1% flood risk, which is the equivalent of a 100-year flood event. So FEMA maps, and again, we're not doing FEMA maps, but they are basically that graph, that inundation map, which is the 1 in 100 chance, 1% chance that you'll get flooding. We're also going to look at a 0.2% flood risk, which is a 1 in 500 chance of flooding. 500-year event. We're also going to look at percent risk of flooding at 1 foot. So we'll say, take all your land, whatever the topography of the land, what's the chance that water is going to exceed? What's the risk probability that you'll have 1 foot of water or more above the grade? And so that way you can look at any particular area and say, because we could do it with 0 above, just in other words, the grade, but then it becomes, a lot of things can have a little bit of water and not, but 1 foot of water, it's hard to drive through it, it's hard to, most buildings, so the idea, that'll be one of our graphs. And we're also going to give you some of those exceedance curves for up to 5 of your critical infrastructures. So we're going to be presenting this in a way that we hope is easy for people to understand. This is from a project we did down on the South Shore for Duxbury, Marshfield, and Scituate. This is Scituate's Front Street area harbor. And so this, basically the idea is that you use color coding to to illustrate the depth. So 0 to 2 feet of flooding will be the lightest color. 2 to 4 feet is another color until you get progressively darker. So the idea is that you can very quickly look at something and understand what the depth is. If you really want to drill into it, you can put your pointer on a GIS map and get the actual depth. But just for presentation purposes, this is the system that we use, and it works quite well. And we are going to be looking at, again, municipal assets. The town is going to give us some first floor elevations that we're going to be comparing against the flood depths. If we don't have first floor elevations, we will be looking just at the survey maps. It's called LIDAR, and we have some detailed survey maps. We'll use that and do some estimation. We'll do a site visit to most of these buildings. And then we'll give you a little summary report on each of the vulnerable pieces of infrastructure. Similarly, we'll be looking at natural resources, again, as I mentioned. It'll be more of a qualitative, it's not going to be a very detailed study, but it kind of looks at some of the impacts. And these are some of the what we call photorealistic renderings. This happened to be something, I believe this was Marshfield's sewer plant. And even though it looks a lot of water here, the actual sewer plant itself was actually okay. And then we're going to go into once we understand what's vulnerable, then we go into the adaptation strategies. Where do we go and what do we recommend to actually deal with this? Protecting natural resources. We will be looking at some cost impacts. It'll be, sort of limited scope, but to order of magnitude cost impacts. And then we'll also be looking at possibly some local zoning and permitting changes. And, the three common adaptation strategies, the concepts are you can protect things, which is basically keeping the water out, like seawalls or flood barriers or things. You can accommodate. You can say, let the water come in, and now let's deal with it and make sure the electrical panels are above the water and so on. And then the most controversial is probably retreat. At some point, some places, and I'm not sure if you will have that here, but if you do, retreat is actually a very viable option at some point. And we'll be talking about some planning tools that might interest some of your boards, regulatory tools, spending, tax incentives, possibly, certainly protection type measures, and then floodproofing, where you can dry or wet floodproof, where dry floodproofing is basically waterproof a building so nothing gets in. Wet proofing is let the water come in and deal with it accordingly. As I mentioned earlier, public outreach is a very important part of this project. We are going to be holding a number of public information sessions. The first one, once we get the model results, we're going to actually want to come, because part of we feel that this is very important for us, because we're looking at survey data, and it's you have the public, what floods, the reality of how things perform. It becomes a reality check for us. So when we say something's flooding and they say that's not going to flood, then we'll see why our model doesn't work in that particular location. Like I meant, we met already with the selectmen. Part of we encourage a lot of regional, as you look at some of these things, sometimes in a regional strategy, if there's something that maybe you and the town of Hull can work together on, that's something. We certainly recommend that your nonprofits get involved, whether it's yacht clubs or whatever you have, people that are affected by this. And we plan to use your local WATD and cable access, which you already have going here. So, the idea is get that message out. And lastly, our tentative sort of project milestones. We started with a signed contract in early September. We kicked off in mid-September. We finished phase one sort of towards the end of October. We're now in the modeling phase. We hope to have the model done no later than mid-December with the vulnerability assessment preliminary done in sort of towards the middle of January. Somewhere early February, end of January, we're looking to have that first meeting to kind of go over the flood maps. Then we start going into the phase 3 strategies sometime in March, another public meeting, and then somewhere in the end of April is when we're looking to wrap this up. And this project is being sort of shepherded by a local steering committee. Some of you are on it, and but you know, there's a number of Abby is the project manager for the town, and so it's a very good committee and a lot of interested people. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a very exciting project, and that's it. Any questions? I hate getting them. Well, I would.
Just have a quick question for you. I know you said that you don't really get into the FEMA map issue.
Right.
But at the end of the study, if we were to adopt some of your protectionist measures for keeping the water out, would it help those residents who are going to be impacted with flood insurance rates?
It depends. There may be areas where if you do a municipal project that improves a culvert or you know, lets water flow out or raises a road that stops water from coming in, it may have the positive benefit, obviously, of anybody upstream of that now gets flood surge coming through. If you can reduce that flood surge by a municipal project, yes, it will help. Will everything that we recommend have, you know, for other people for flood insurance? No, I would say no. A lot of it will be very specific to what it may do. Is it may possibly lower your own insurance rates, the town's insurance rates.
So the focus is really in protecting municipal infrastructure.
Yes.
If there's a collateral benefit to residents, it's simply a collateral benefit.
If we can, absolutely, there will be some, I'm sure, some areas where we might be able to do something that will hopefully benefit others other than municipal.
In the mapping of this, are you also mapping the drainage utilities and the impacts on those?
In terms of the utilities, we're primarily what's above ground. We will be looking, most of your one of the things that we've found in going through this in many other towns, you know, it sounds somewhat flippant to say it, but things that flood today are going to get worse and will flood more later. So it's not, you know, we kind of know where the basic areas are going to be. There may be some areas that flood. So the idea is that most of your underground infrastructure that's there today is already flood resistant. In other words, it's doing the function today because it's flooding today. For instance, one area where we will definitely, pump stations as an example, that's part of your utility system. Your sewer or your drainage system. Pump stations are, you know, typically have electric power, they have pumps, and if water rises to a certain point, you may impact that. So I'd say that'll be more of the focus when it comes to utilities. Most of your like above wires and cables and things, those aren't going to be impacted. We're not looking at wind. So wind, you know, they may have other issues with wind, but we're not looking at wind for this project. Sure.
You're using the conservative.
You want to? He just wants to hear you on the mic.
Thought I could speak loud enough. I'm auto hauling, 212 Otis Street, if that's important. You're using this model for the sea level rise that NOAA has produced, and the most conservative is about 2 meters at the end of the century. All right? Now, where did NOAA get that? Did they get that from the climate models, the highest rise due to temperature change, or is this based on something they averaged?
Let me just go back to that quickly. Here, let me just. So the answer is that the bottom line the bottom, what's called the lowest. That line is basically an extension of the existing, let's say in Boston, we have a tide gauge, and Woods Hole has one. There are tide gauges all around, and they're basically all around the world. And the tide gauges all have a very similar extension. So basically the lowest is if we say there's no climate change, nothing's happening, just extend exactly what's been going on for the last 100 years, okay? The science has been that it's already starting to, in the last years, it's already starting to move up. So the other three curves are based on different modeling scenarios. The intermediate low doesn't take into account glacial melt. The intermediate high and the highest are two different models of glacial melt. And basically, so the intermediate low is just the ocean warming. So as the ocean warms, and that's, again, has been shown to be happening, if the ocean warms, it increases in volume.
There's a whole bunch of different results that people calculate. Which one did they use? The most conservative one, the highest?
Well, the highest is the more conservative.
On global warming.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is not even the highest. There are higher ones, but they're not included in this. So I can't tell you exactly which one they use. I can't tell you the model.
There's a temperature effect in the
Yes,
ocean.
yes,
And there's a wide range of calculations for that.
absolutely.
Does the highest one include the highest estimate?
Yes, well, again, it's the highest of the data that's included in this. There are actually higher models today. If there are scientists who say that the curve is even higher, we're not going to go to something even higher than what's here. We think that going with the highest published data is a reasonable planning approach.
Because that's all published, what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
oh yeah, yeah.
Does the highest include the melting of the Greenland ice cap?
Yes, yes, oh, absolutely, yeah.
What about the Antarctic?
It's including the higher melting scenarios of all ice caps, everything. So it's not necessarily saying that everything's disappearing, but it's the higher model, yeah.
Because 2 meters seems low then, to
Well,
me.
well, not everything is projected
I've
to
heard 20,
disappear.
30 feet.
Well, I'm not sure it'll be that much, but.
You know, as a follow-up to this gentleman's question here, what about the Woods Hole group influence and activities with regard to this modeling? Is this a separate model that they have based in turn on the NOAA predictions, or how much of a contribution is quote-unquote the Woods Hole group providing in terms of the modeling?
A huge amount, yeah.
Okay.
Well, the model, when you say the model, you mean the Boston Harbor with the mesh?
Well,
Or,
presumably, because you inferred that is the same model that's going to be
right,
used
that-
here.
and that's right.
For the
So-
Hingham.
So basically what happens is, when they run this massive, and this as they joke with me, if we're getting blackouts, it's because of them running their model. They're using supercomputers in various universities linked, because the model is just so big. You can imagine every one of these, either you have all those nodes are going up and down to the Gulf of Mexico. And so as they run all these storms and different scenarios and things, it's just obviously a lot of data to compute. So what they're doing for so for 2030, they've run this model for the Boston model. And so that whole risk, it's this Monte Carlo, and don't ask me, I'm not a modeling expert, but it's this Monte Carlo risk analysis that they're doing. So they've run that for the Boston model. What we're going to be doing is then taking the data off of that and then being able to use that specifically for Hingham. So, but they have to get that data out, and it's not easy.
I guess where I'm headed in the question is the fact that there's going to be probabilities, as you pointed out, for their predictions from the model, but there's also an element of unpredictability in the model itself. So,
Absolutely. Well, I mean, there's an unpredictability in, for instance, the sea level rise. So they're basically taking those same curves for the sea level rise predictions. They're taking those same curves, and at 2030, they're putting in, what's the projected sea level rise. So they rerun the whole model with the higher sea level rise. But yes, there's inherent, and by definition, this is projections. All of that is projections. So one of the important things that you'll be able to start thinking about is that you may have some longer-term adaptation strategies that you don't want to do now, aside from the fact you won't have the money, but you don't even want to do them because you don't know necessarily how this data is actually happening. You may find that either that the projections for the sea level rise are off. 20 years from now, we may be looking back with better data and saying, you know what, this is more on the intermediate high, or it's on the intermediate low, or it could be on another curve that's completely different. So 20 years out, that's why the farther you do this analysis too far in the future, you run the risk of,
Well, you could run it every 5 years and
yeah,
refine it.
oh, you could, with new data.
So it sounds like you're not actually gonna run the model, that Woods Hole is running the model,
Yeah.
and you're taking
Yes,
the
they
data
are.
from it?
What they do, they will be giving us what we call the surface water elevation, so the profile, and we take that, and then we take that, put it on the topographic mapping, and then we can calculate the difference in grade from the water surface. And the water surface is a variable surface. It's not, another modeling technique, which we did not recommend doing, and I'm glad the steering committee did not want to do it. A much more simple event is just to do what's called a bathtub, which is take a straight line across. But we know that you have wave run-up effects, you have all kinds of, the bathtub approach it's simplified, it's good enough for some, large-scale planning. But if you really want to do it right, and being that we had the Boston model to take advantage of, why not do it? Question? Abby, you wanna-
Sure. Well, I think so. For now, I think we need to adjourn and let the planning board continue their business, and the Conservation Commission will adjourn to the South Hearing Room upstairs. If anybody has questions, wants additional information, if it's something that we weren't able to answer tonight, or you could think of it at home, certainly feel free to call the Conservation Office or email me, Abby Pearsall, and we will go ahead and get that information for you. If we need to connect with Woods Hole or other folks to get some more information, we can do that. And again, thank you for listening and for your questions, and we will keep in touch.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a 5-minute.
Agenda item, it's 7:45, and I'd like to go to our next agenda item, which is Christina Estates at Baker Hill. Request for a revised cost to complete, request for the release of Lot 31, and a request to eliminate a portion of the walking trail. The planning board, several of the planning board members visited the site, walked the area at Baker Hill with the community planning director and with John Chesia, and we're able to familiarize ourselves with the existing conditions and the state of completion of the project, so that was very helpful to visualize that. So I'd like to, I guess I'd start with the applicant on the request for the revised cost to complete. Sure, if you could identify yourselves and
Tom Corcoran and Tom Duggan.
perhaps could speak at the mic. Go ahead.
Oh. Tom Corcoran and Tom Duggan. And we had requested that the cost to complete, John Chesia has most recently drawn up, be revised. That for one reason, the bound work in John Chesia's estimate has been completed, and since he did the estimate, CHA Engineers has provided a letter certifying that in fact the bounds are in place according to the plan. And then secondly, $60,000 was set aside plus contingency for, to resolve what was potentially a problem with the sewer line installed in the street. The initial preliminary as-built had indicated that there was a problem with the pitch in the sewer line, showing it to be 0.3% in some areas, when it had been designed to be 0.5. Subsequently, CHA engineers has gone out and rechecked the sewer line and found it to be, in one small area, 0.47%, where it was designed to be 0.5, so a difference of 0.03. And that was in a much smaller area. It was only over a section, I think, of about 130 linear feet of sewer. So we were requesting that the bond be adjusted, the estimate that John Chesia did be adjusted downward by the $37,000 for the bond work, plus the that included the contingency, I think, yeah. And then by $75,000 for the sewer line work. That was the cost, the estimate plus the contingency.
Well, we were just out there on Saturday. John, with the bounds, did you do this before the walk on Saturday, or?
The easement bounds. The easement bounds, the reason I haven't located them all is because that would be a substantial effort for me to just do walking around with even a plan and a cloth tape or whatever, because if you look at the plan, it's just land and markers. There's no features in the field that you can relate to necessarily. I mean, I'm pretty familiar with the site, and I'm pretty good at finding that stuff, but I think I pointed one out in the field, the leaves, cover things. That one was right next to a trail. Picture one that's in the open space in the woods somewhere. They're almost impossible to locate. So I haven't made the effort because it would cost, potentially could take 20, 30, 40 hours for me to try to find these things. So I was sort of waiting.
Would you say you have an affidavit saying that they're completed?
Yeah, CHA provided a letter after John's estimate. So, our engineer, CHA, provided a letter about a week ago certifying that they had just put those bounds in place and that they surveyed them and that they are in fact placed according to the plan. So they provided a certification that they're in place. So it seemed to us a bit unnecessary to hire someone else now to go out and recheck what they just certified.
John, did you review the certification?
Yeah.
The
only difference I would say that you should get a stamped plan with the endorsement on it from the surveyor that these are where they're located, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't doubt that they set them. But I did go up and down the road, and I found the ones on the road. But the ones in the field, I just realized how much time it was going to take to try to find them. Usually, there's only a handful of bounds, and they run an easement of a pipe, and you can walk down the thing, and you can okay, they're here. And typically, they are set closer to the time that I'm checking them. These were set, maybe a year ago. So that leaves have fallen. They're not. There's no fresh evidence of digging or anything. It's not like, usually you go out and it's like, oh yeah, they've beaten a path to it. There's dirt around them and it's easy to see. They've been there too long for me to be able to find easily.
John, have the bounds in the easements and the bounds along the roadway been located on the progress as-built that you've seen?
There's a separate sheet for the easement plan.
Okay.
That shows bounds on it. Like I said, I think ultimately you should get a stamped, and that's what they said they're going to do in the letter. I did get a copy of the letter that they were going to record a plan at the registry that shows where the bounds are, so that, I think that,
I'm looking at the letter from CHA from Stephanie Kaiser, the PE, and it references essentially a certification, but I'm just wondering what's the basis and how is it documented? Were these, did she submit or have you seen the?
Separate one.
Have you seen the as-built drawings that might indicate the status of these and what they base their certification on?
I haven't seen an updated, so from the Stephanie Kaiser letter, I have not seen an updated as-built.
Okay.
obviously, I reviewed the as-built, I saw the issue. I talked to Mary, we put in money for that. And I guess even, Roger came up with a higher cost than even came up with, but I did try to quantify trenching and pipe and pavement and everything. The sewer in that section is low or deep. So they're sticking something down 10, 12 feet perhaps to be able to read something at the bottom. It wouldn't surprise me that the survey was in error. That particular section, I was out there, and I know they set it with a laser, and they had levels and everything when they did it, so I was a little surprised, although it is, I'm not shooting my own grades, I'm just, checking the materials and whatever. So, again, it's up to the board. You could ask for the as-built to be updated and stamped or whatever, so somebody's,
I mean, it seems to me that
putting-
in terms of inspection down the road, we're going on a certification now from the applicant's consulting engineer, and you're our peer reviewer, and you're basing your vetting of this on their certification, but I'm just thinking, shouldn't we have a physical document that would show all this, show everything that's been certified, so then we know that we have a record?
Is he talking about the bounds?
I'm talking about the
He's
bounds.
still talking about the bounds, not the sewer.
Okay,
The part of the as-built I'm talking about is
there's two
the
parts.
part that deals with the bounds.
This was the as.
That's the bound, this is the bound plan, draft.
Okay.
I mean, we don't have finals, but, which, I understand, they submitted a draft for comment. So, it's, ultimately, yes, you should have something, and if you wanted to, you could choose to hold some percentage of that in lieu of the plan, perhaps. I did carry money for the plans to be finished. Actually, I gave them no credit for the plans, actually, because there's a lot of stuff that they still needed to do. So,
I mean, what we could do, we could reduce it 35,000 subject to your review of the as-built
for the,
for the bounds.
well, I did review the bound plan, it's just not stamped,
Needs to be stamped and then filed at the registry,
Right.
and then, so maybe it would be subject to,
There's nothing, I don't think there's any reason that they wouldn't be able to do that.
I don't think so. There's an asset monumentation plan right here that she's certified. That's the plan she's certified. So we could probably.
I mean, there's no reason not to stamp it and record it as far as I know.
So in order to have the easements filed, we need to have the bounds plan filed. At least that's how I see it.
I don't know about that. I think that plan,
no.
the reason you file that particular plan is now you have a record of where the bounds specifically were set.
That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's
Well,
what
that's
that
that.
does.
But
It's
so
just not recorded or,
it's not recorded, it's not stamped, so we need it stamped and recorded, so that's in process.
right.
The certification is based upon a draft plan where they'd follow up with a certified stamp plan.
Right.
Okay, all right. So that deals with your item number 4 on your cost to complete. On the grades relative to the drainage, on the storm drains, is that what I was looking at, the earlier one? I'm understanding that the grades were seen as being off by a certain percentage, but then when the engineer went back, when CHA went back, they thought that the grades were less of an issue, less at variance?
Correct, that's for the sewer.
Okay,
So the sewer line, they did a draft as-built plan and profile, and they had, based on that, there was a section that varied from 0.4%, one was 0.3%, another was 0.4%, some were like 0.6%. The design of it was all to be 0.5%. And there is a certain tolerance within, but 0.3 to me was a little bit
too far off.
too far off on the reported plan.
So what's the mitigation, what's the corrective action for that?
Their claim is that they went back out, surveyed it, and the survey was in error in some manner, but we haven't seen what specifically that error was.
So you need to close the loop on that with the applicant in terms of verifying which
Well,
is
they should,
survey.
they should update the plan, I guess,
Okay.
yeah, for sure.
We provided that information also to the sewer department, and they're reviewing it. They had concerns about if the slope is inadequate, it would require more frequent flushing or maintenance. So they're reviewing the material as well, so they're part of the conversation.
Are they up to speed on the second survey? In other words, their concern was expressed when they probably saw the initial as-built that indicated .3 as the pitch. But the letter that the engineer has not provided.
I did give them the letter.
said
Yep.
it's brought up to .47. And it's also on a much smaller section of the.
Shorter length.
You had, in your estimate, there was a section of about 600 feet.
Right.
Do you want to come up to a microphone?
And now, sorry, in
Right.
John's initial estimate, there was a section of shoreline in question was about 600 feet. Now, according to the latest letter from CHA, there's only one area that's off by a much smaller amount, and it's maybe about 130 feet that's in question. And even that 130 feet is at a .47, not a .3. So it's very close to what was designed.
So I did provide all the information to the sewer department, and they're reviewing it. And they asked me to request that the board allow them to review that, and I have not heard back from them.
So we should hold on that then until we do the review.
And so,
Yeah, I'm thinking that once we get it vetted. So I'm looking at, are there any other items on this, the cost to complete of the trees? Some of the street trees? In the first section of the roadway, what was the status on that? Are they, some were planted, but they're not identified in the as-built, and some haven't survived. Is this the quantity of trees that would have to be replaced?
Yeah, and it's sort of a, I would have to say it's a little bit of a rough estimate because I didn't, but what happened is, so what happened was, there were trees, but the trees were too close to the road. They weren't planted where they were supposed to be planted per the plan.
Okay.
So those trees had been there for too long to be able to be moved without causing too much disruption. So essentially, I think those trees were cut down. There might have been a couple that were moved. I don't know. These guys might know better. But so new trees were planted in certain areas. So when you come up, and then there was a waiver from the previous site walk for all the trees to be planted from essentially the slope, if you're coming up the road on the right-hand side on that slope. So those were waived, so I deducted those, and I looked at 50-foot spacing and came up with a count of about 30 that weren't waived, and I didn't seem to be planted per the street tree specification. It's hard this time of year to tell if something's alive, but I know in prior visits, some of them looked like they might not have made it because the leaves were brown before, they should have been brown. But when I last went out, I really couldn't tell which ones were which, so. And then the new section, you can kind of tell, because they're all, well, we could see it, we walked in here, and you could see which is just the cul-de-sac that didn't have the trees. So,
So in your estimation, everything that you've quantified on, the status of everything you've quantified on this cost to complete is accurate, it's vetted as what we've seen in the field, so is your recommendation then that we hold with what you have recommended on the totals?
yeah, I mean, subject to what you might want to do about the couple of things, like, it doesn't, I don't doubt that the bounds are set, I don't doubt that that's there, you could say, but the plan's not filed, so that you could say, okay, we'll give you some percentage of it, maybe not all of it, because you do have to file the plan and record it.
Right.
As far as the sewer,
The grades, we have to wait on the sewer,
you
so I
might
wouldn't
have to wait on
change
the
that.
sewer commission, once you get their letter, then they could come right back in and say, we want the rest of that
Right.
money back.
Could
I
we
guess
just
is
make the
another-
sewer letter one of the contingencies along with the registry of deeds stamp? I mean, because are we gonna, if they get the letter back from the sewer department, why do they need to come to us again?
We could, I think, release it then, but we'd want to have it in place until we got those
Right.
two documents.
Well,
Yeah,
they
you
say-
could do
right,
that, and
that's
just so
what I'm
that
saying.
next, when they get that data, then that gets, I don't know what form of bond you have or surety you have. Well, if you have cash, then it's easy.
so if
I
there's
mean,
a
if it were-
dollar amount specific,
So when you get, so what I could do, if the board so pleases, you could say, when that information comes in, you get the sewer commission letter, you get the plan that shows the profile, you get that recorded at the registry of deeds, here it is. I can just update
Right.
this, scratch them off, and then you get the
And
difference.
then you've reviewed it, you're satisfied with it, then we could update it then.
Yeah, and then if
Okay.
if you voted tonight, you don't have to come back in for that vote. You
Right.
could just, it's part of the thing, but you need to provide the documents. Does that make sense?
Okay,
The
so,
other question I've got, John, I know that you factor in a contingency, right, 15%? Is that the industry practice, 15%?
It varies quite a bit, actually. I mean, in some towns it's higher.
Yeah.
In this particular case, the road's very close to complete. If this were starting from scratch, brand new, I might use like 50.
Right.
Because we know what's happened.
but you're looking at the
But we're at the
back,
end of the,
you're looking at the final small
yeah,
percentage
we're at
of
the end.
the
We have,
development.
you know, probably 85% of the road's top course of pavement, bounds are set, there's grass. It's not like you have a raw site out here, so that, I think that's a little bit
Right.
more reasonable. And the reason, we've seen, in particular, pavement costs vary. They just bounced all over the map. I mean, it used to be,
Inflation costs go up too.
but now it's down.
Right, well,
It's like,
but we're almost done.
yeah, so you don't, I mean, that's good for you guys, hopefully, you didn't have to pay the huge price, but it's like, you know, when we hold it, I was looking at a lot of estimates, it was in the hundreds of dollars, hundred something a ton, and now it's 85, so it all
Are there
depends.
any other questions from the board?
No, I think,
No?
I think Judy's motion is a good one. I
Okay.
support
Do you
that.
want to,
Is there anybody here from Baker Hill?
yeah, I don't know, is anybody here from Baker Hill, any of the neighbors here, or the abutters?
No.
No? So why don't we, Judy, do you want to make the motion, and we can,
Well, I don't have the document in
Oh.
front of me, so,
Okay. I guess it's basically.
are we reducing the cost to complete by,
I thought we were staying with the current recommendation that John Chessie made, but once the as-built plan
right.
on the
Well,
bounds was
what's his
submitted.
recommendation?
I think
To
it's
reduce the cost to come,
35,000 reduction once they, for the plans.
Right.
Once the plans are filed, it'll be $35,000 reduction there out of the 120. And what was this, what's the aggregate of the second request? How much?
75,000.
so we would reduce the total reduction is 121,000, is that right?
Right, the new proposed cost to complete for the first section of the road is $120,000, if I'm reading this correctly.
Right.
And so, he's proposing to reduce the cost to complete for station 0 to 30 from the current amount, which is, do you have the current total? Yeah, I think it's 211 down to 120.
So, and we would reduce it by that amount, conditional upon receiving the certified bounds, plan, no,
No, that $120,000 is what John's recommendation is. If the board would like to authorize a further conditional reduction of that cost to complete, then you would say, upon receipt of the proof of filing of the certified plan of the bounds, that initial cost to complete would be further reduced by
so
$35,000
then I would move that we reduce the cost to complete by 120,000 tonight,
to $120,000.
to 120,000 tonight,
Tonight.
with further reductions of
5,000.
35,000 once we get a certified, plans from the registry of deeds, right, on the bounds. Proof of filing,
Certified bounds plan
Right,
at the
stamped.
registry.
yes.
So-
And by another 72,000?
And then the second part of the motion is to reduce the cost to complete from Station 29 to the end of the road to a new amount of $152,000.
Once we have received from the sewer department, no?
With the condition that upon receipt from the sewer department of a letter saying that the sewer is okay,
Right.
an additional
grades are functional.
$75,000 would then be released.
In addition to the 152.
We're going to an amount of 152.
Right.
And then if
But
they,
then it
once
would
they
be
prove
reduced further
by another 75,000.
once we receive the letter from the sewer department stating their agreement that the conditions are acceptable.
That the sewer is acceptable and it
Right.
won't have to be rebuilt.
And so
Right.
what would be held as collateral once if we approve the motion?
It would be 272 minus 110, so you'd be down to about 162.
And what was
And the only reason why I bring that up is if we release lot 31, the only collateral we have left is the cash. So that's important to recognize, but 162,000 is still 162,000. So, yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. So I guess the motion is clear. Is it clear?
It's clear to Mary.
Is
Is
it written
it
and
clear
clear?
to you?
Who's got the
Is it clear to you, John?
Yeah, David, the only comment I would have is the sewer commission's looking, I mean, I know those.
Go to the mic, John.
I know there was discussion in the field about them wanting something TV and this and that may add, you know, you may
Right.
not get, maybe what you want is whatever the sewer commission wants, it
Done.
would be reduced by whatever they agree to.
But I would say if we don't get the letter from them saying that it's, that it's entirely fine, then it wouldn't be reduced. And so then, because we can't, I don't think, predict every other eventuality, so if you get the, right, I think if they say it's okay
That 70
as
grand
is, then
doesn't
we would go with the full amount. If they say that work needs to be done, then that's
zero.
not what we asked for.
Okay. Yeah,
Right?
I just want to make sure everybody's on the same
Okay.
page on that.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because the sewer commission is looking for some video of the lines that they're waiting for, I guess, for quite a while. That's somewhat related to the adequacy of this small stretch of sewer, but it's also a more global thing, and so they may not sign off on this matter until they have the other information.
Is the area of the issue in the grades downstream?
No, no, it's in the newer section.
It's in the newer section, so it's on a higher grade. It would not impact the functionality of something above it.
If it clogged,
Yeah, it would just be, it's in the new section, and I'm not sure exactly where in the new section, because the pipe, the as-built, and the reason it was a 600-foot length is because there were flatter sections, then a steeper section, then flatter sections, and it's not likely that you could adjust a flatter section here without doing something to the steeper section in between. So there was an issue like that, but it's all in the new section, so everything else is downhill that exists today.
An issue here won't exacerbate something downhill.
No, no.
Okay.
In fact, those ones are, that's the thing. This part is the only flat section in the road. As, you know, most of the road's pretty steep, and all the sewers are pretty steep everywhere else.
So I think we have a motion that we all agree on, the applicant agrees on, the peer review engineer agrees on, and our director of community planning agrees on.
Do you
Second,
have a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
you have to address the trail question.
Terrell, yes. Also, when we visited the site, we looked at a plan that was submitted for a proposed revision to the extent of the trail. And in orange, this is at the area of Baker Hill that's overlooking Burton's Lane. And so what we have here in green, or yellow lime green, is the area that's a loop that goes up on the high ground and then transitions down along the little brook. And so the proposal here is to delete that and just to have the straightaway, which is the orange piece which connects Baker Hill Drive up at the high grade down to Burton's Lane. And when we walked it with the applicant on Saturday, we were thinking that it might be appropriate if we did clearing on this higher piece, the higher ground portion of the old cart path, so that it was accessible. People could get there. I don't mean handicapped accessible, so people could get there. But then we would agree to delete. The proposal was to delete the lower area, which is down along the brook, because it goes down a fairly steep grade, but we would maintain all the rest of it as originally designed with the placement of the wood chips. Now, the question that came up is where we have a much steeper grade here, where we're going from Baker Hill Drive, we're going down a slope of about 50 or so feet, and it's very steep. It's like a 1-to-1. Originally that was proposed to have wood chips on it. The question about that was how stable or sustainable that might be and how safe it might be. So what we had asked the applicant to do is if they could think in the interim and give us some, make a proposal in terms of how you might stabilize that maintain if it's going to be grass, maintain the sod, for, to control erosion and things like that. And then also the second request was at the top, is there a way at Baker Hill Drive, is there a way we could identify with some kind of a treatment at the sidewalk or some kind of pavers, we could identify that that's the entrance to that trail? There are actually two trails. There's another one over here, which I don't know if I have, is that on this map? The other one that goes, it's not on this map, but it's in the other.
There's a resident who voiced a pretty strong objection to.
Well, I was going to
he
ask
here?
if the resident,
Is
is
he
the
here?
resident here?
He's not here. The request at hand is about eliminating the loop.
Right.
The neighbor with the concerns about the steep slope, we did email today. He wasn't able to come, and I did advise him that the developer will be working on a proposal with their engineer about possible changes to that steep slope section. And when that happens, we'll make sure that he knows about it. He can come. In the meantime, we connected him with the developer to talk.
Why don't we table the request on the slope? The path we walked the slope and deal just with the loop now.
So Gary, I
That
didn't
make sense?
understand what you said. I thought the request was to eliminate that loop,
Well,
and
there
then
were-
you talked about clearing the loop.
No, on Saturday when we got the proposal on the drawing here, we understood it was the deletion of the whole loop. But when we walked it on Saturday, this part of the loop is high ground. And that's an old cart path, so we were wondering if we just clear the trees and the debris, but not place the wood chips, just so people could get access in there, because it's part of the open space. But then delete the lower part of the walkway, which is down quite a bit down on the grade and next to the brook. Seemed like a reasonable compromise, and I thought that the applicant was in favor of that as we walked it. Was that the case?
Can we just be sure that I know on the map the extent of the work that's being eliminated for the record,
So
for when the board votes?
basically, this section here, we were going
Yeah.
to keep
Right,
running up to about the end of this this finger.
okay,
And then the section which is down gradient would be eliminated.
okay. So I'll just show the board just to
Right.
make sure. Okay.
So you have that on the map, Mary?
So this is what
Yeah.
we put in the record, so this would be the
That would do,
section
okay.
that would be deleted
That's consistent with what we thought.
based on what you're discussing, if you choose to vote it that way.
Yeah.
So then I would make a motion that we would eliminate the requirement to create a walking path on the loop section of the plan dated March 25th, 1999, is that? I can't see the date
that is
very clearly. For a definitive subdivision, Christina Estates, as shown on this map presented by the applicant tonight, and that on the remainder of that loop portion, that the path be hand cut with no treatment on the ground.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
There were two other areas that I wanted to also just clarify on the orange portion of the path, the primary portion of the path. And we talked about cleaning up any debris that was on the path going down from the lower area down to Burton's Lane, and, any trash or tires or things like that. And then also, we wanted to make sure that the footbridge was going to be placed over the little brook. There's a footbridge, and if I'm looking at this plan, is that the footbridge? It's noted as a dotted line. Is that accurate, that location?
The footbridge
Yeah.
area is the one we had to kind of hurdle
Yeah,
over. It's
yeah.
kind of the tires.
I just want to make sure it's accurate as shown on the plan. Okay, so those were two remaining aspects. Have I left anything out from the sidewalk?
Yep.
Yeah?
Not from the sidewalk, but you still have a request to release lot 31 in front of you.
Yes, well, I thought maybe want to do this first, and then we can talk
What is
about
that?
31. This was just to, I just wanted to clarify that they're going to place the footbridge, and then we're going to clean the debris. So that's resolved? Yes. Okay. All right, so then the next item is Lot 31, the release of Lot 31. think basically looking at everything I saw on Saturday, I didn't see any reason not to release Lot 31.
No, like I said, the collateral is the cash. So, it's the last lot, right? So kind of a milestone with this project.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm in favor of releasing the lot.
So
Yeah,
we'll make a motion?
I would make a motion that we act favorably on the applicant's request to release Lot 31, known as Christina Estates in the Baker Hill area of subdivision project.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Good luck, thank you.
Congratulations.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is Lewis Court, a request for an extension of time to December 15th, 2014. And I'd like to ask the applicant to present.
Good evening. My name is John Wooden, the applicant for 24 Lewis Court, to apply for the three-lot subdivision there. Here to ask for the continuance to December 15th, Mary, I believe?
Yep.
To December 15th, if that's possible. It will hopefully give us time to work through some more Conservation Commission issues, engineering, that's been kind of going back and forth between Gary James and John Chesia. And it'll also hopefully give us some time to settle the sewer issue as to whether all the lots will be on sewer, a portion of them will be on sewer, and none of them will be on sewer. And the combination of what septics then we would need, et cetera. So I was hoping that would be good.
January, if you want more time. I mean, I know you're dealing with a complicated
Yeah,
subdivision up there.
William, honestly, I was thinking about that.
7/15's not that far away, and you guys have a lot going on.
You know, I was thinking about that as well, and I know that there's a 2-week turnaround if anything needs to change for Gary and John, and I don't want to be here. So, you know what? I'm in the mindset to just go ahead and do that then, because we're also into the holidays, and that'll go like that.
Was the board okay with January 15th?
Sounds reasonable to me.
Is
That's enough time,
Is
7
that a
weeks?
Monday?
7 weeks is enough
January
time.
15th is on a Thursday, the 12th is the Monday, the 19th is the holiday, so the 12th is.
The 12th would be fine. I wasn't able to see the New Year's schedule, so to speak. It's not posted yet.
Then I'd make a motion that we grant the applicant's request for continuance on the Lewis Court proposed subdivision until January 12th of 2015.
So, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great.
And there's no questions?
No, we were gonna call Tom as an expert witness on
Right,
Baker Hill.
right.
But we that was a long time.
All right, his memory's short on that one, right?
Thanks for waiting.
Thank you. Okay, we have a Form A lot.
The applicant is not here today,
Okay.
and I will.
Should we hold off till the end, or no?
He's 92, he asked us to proceed, if the board wants to continue, we could, but pretty straightforward.
So this is a Form A plan submitted on 8 Alden Road and 2 Weston Road. Submitted by the applicant is Jonathan and Amelia Hughes, 2 Weston Road. Oh, the applicant here is also Robert and Dorothy Bonsall at 8 Alden Road. So they're the applicant. The owner is Jonathan and Amelia Hughes on 2 Weston Road. So what is the plan?
So the plan is that Mr. Bonsall his septic system is failing, and the sewer has been extended up to approximately here in the roadway for this person to connect. And so he needs to connect to sewer, and in doing his investigation, he's got a big outcropping of ledge here. And so it was determined that he could connect to the sewer here, and he needed to acquire either an easement or a section of land from his neighbor who owns this whole piece of property in order to do the work without having to blast a huge hole in his front yard.
Okay.
And they determined that the best way to proceed was to transfer the sliver of land
Okay.
to this gentleman, so then he can connect to sewer. And so the request is to allow this section of land to go from this property to this property. It's not a new building lot. They're existing lots.
And given the size of this lot, this is all one lot, right?
Correct.
I don't know what these dotted lines represent. Is this a parcelization line here? There's 3 lines? The question I have is if this was a separate lot, are there any reductions in frontage?
It's not a separate lot.
It's not a separate lot, so you're okay. So it doesn't seem like to me there's any impact to either parcel in doing this. So, does anybody have any questions on this?
No, I would move that we act favorably on the plan of land 2 Western Road dated November 6, 2014.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excellent. Okay. Whoops. Gonna knock the pen over. Sure. I could do that at the end. Alrighty. Okay, it's 8:24, and the last agenda item on our agenda is have a presentation to the planning board by the accessory unit study group. And what I'd like to do is if I could ask perhaps the study committee wants to sit up a little closer, or is it okay there? Or I'm thinking maybe if we just sit around the table. I wanted to first ask the accessory unit study group to perhaps go around and do some introductions for the planning board and then also for folks at home. And then I could have the planning board, we could introduce ourselves to you and go from there. So if you'd like to start?
Could I interrupt
Sure.
1 second? Could I ask the cable TV engineer if it would be okay if we just unhook that microphone and let people pass it around so that they didn't have to get up, unless they want to get up, but if it's easier for you to pass that around,
Well, I'm thinking if we could all sit around this table too, if we have enough. Then I'm just thinking, would it be easier for the TV? But you can make it work. Modern technology. Do you want to start, Mark?
Well, I'm Mark Cullings at 44 Spring Street, and I'm a member at large of the committee, and we've met on 3 separate occasions and come a long way from getting to know each other and coming up with some ideas that I think are useful for the town to have a conversation about something that I think has been considered for a number of years, and now is the right time to have a productive townwide conversation about accessory dwelling units.
Laura Marwill, 30 Summit Drive. I'm a member at large.
Mark O'Bour, 33 Elm Street, member at large. I'm very concerned about the long-term demographics of the town. So I think this is a bylaw that we probably need to consider.
Richard Cook, member at large.
Eileen Richards, member of the HDIC.
Tondorf Dick, the chair of the planning board. I've thoroughly enjoyed meeting with the accessory unit study committee. We, at the planning board, in our July 14th meeting, decided that this was one of the agenda items in terms of bylaw reviews that we wanted to entertain this year. So we formed this study committee to vet it.
Bill Ramsey, planning board, and my appreciation to the members of the study committee for taking the time to look at this important issue.
Walter Sullivan, Planning Board, thank you for being here.
I'm Judy Smith.
So we have, I didn't know if we had a presentation, if Emily had her presentation. Yeah, sure. We were going to do just a little overview, a little PowerPoint overview, set the stage. Mary is looking up the presentation, I'll just give a little overview. The study committee has met 3 times, and in our meetings, we have essentially developed a list of issues for discussion, and we've also reached out to peer towns to find out what other peer towns have done in terms of precedents for accessory units. And perhaps I just quickly or briefly start with a definition. An accessory dwelling unit is a self-contained housing unit subordinate to and incorporated within or on the same lot as a single-family dwelling and complies with criteria that we've established in a proposed draft bylaw, which we will review with you. And it's a unit that is essentially applied for under the special permit process, and the permit granting process would be the Zoning Board of Appeals. So what we were going to start with is just a little overview, and thanks, Emily, for preparing this.
Belatedly. Hey, and sorry I missed the introduction, so I may end up being a little redundant.
We introduced the committee, so Emily, maybe perhaps you want to introduce yourself for folks at home?
Yeah, Emily Wentworth, I'm the Senior Planner and Zoning Administrator.
This is the revised.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Fine for your earlier presentation?
It did work fine. Does everybody have the revised language or no? No. Just from our, so this is the new language. Hot off the press this one.
There we go.
Great. Yep.
That's nice and clear.
Okay, so you've done an introduction. This is going to be a quick overview of really where this group started. I'm going to go sit over here. Sorry, thank you. Thank you. All these technical difficulties. Okay, so probably a recap of where Gary just left off, but quick definition of what an accessory dwelling unit is. It's a secondary housing unit on the same lot as a single-family home. Most commonly, communities require that that unit be owner-occupied, one of the 2 units on the property, the primary residence or the accessory unit be owner-occupied. The accessory dwelling unit, or ADU, could be located within the primary residence, or, as sometimes is the case, within a detached accessory structure on the same lot. It is always an independent unit, which means it has its own kitchen, its own bathing facilities, and it is subordinate to the primary residence, which means that it's, it's not a traditional 2-family, it's not a duplex, or something along those lines. So that's our definition. Why are we considering an accessory dwelling unit bylaw in Hingham? We've learned about several significant demographic trends from recent planning efforts, notably the 2013 Aging in Hingham report conducted by Elder Services, and then the draft master plan update that you guys have worked on with MAPC. These reports tell us that our household size is declining. It's declined 5% between 2000 and 2010. Affordability is a concern. MAPC conducted a survey in 2013 in support of the master plan work. 78.6% of respondents cited the high cost of living as the top challenge facing the community. While our median income is relatively high, 20% of our households make less than $40,000 a year. It's estimated that 2.3% of households have income below poverty level. We know that a third of our homeowners are cost burden, which means they're spending more than 30% of their gross monthly income on housing-related costs. And 12.5% would be considered severely cost burdened, so they're spending more than 50% of their gross monthly income on housing. The situation's worse for renters. 55% of Hingham renters are cost burdened. Again, 30% of their gross monthly income is spent on housing. And a third are severely cost burdened, and this is the second highest rate on the South Shore. We also learned that we have an aging population. MAPC refers to this as the seniority majority. In 2010, 34% of our households included somebody over the age of 65, but that's projected to increase to 47% by 2020, so relatively soon. So how would an ADU bylaw potentially address some of those concerns? We know that there is a community need for housing options that aren't readily available in Hingham today. Our typical building permit that we see down the hall doesn't call for a smaller unit, which may in fact be in demand based on our declining household size and the proportion of cost burden renters in town. They also tend to be relatively affordable by nature, mostly due to their smaller size. And they provide seniors with the ability to age in place, either by having extended family stay in one of the units or renting the accessory dwelling unit to supplement their fixed incomes. ADUs also provide housing in a relatively efficient way. They take advantage of our existing infrastructure and services, and at the same time, construction of accessory units tends to be scattered through the community, or at least in those allowed zoning districts. So this helps to maintain our neighborhood character more so than a larger traditional garden-style apartment building may. Design standards can be crafted to ensure that development's in keeping with our predominantly single-family character as well, and the bylaw could potentially encourage reuse of historic accessory structures that may no longer function as originally designed or otherwise underutilized. So that's why you guys started this conversation, I think, in the past, and then very directly this July created the interdisciplinary group to work on it and study it. I think we'll just add from an administrative standpoint that we feel our current housing regulations could use a bit of an overhaul. We've discovered a number of homes recently with multiple kitchens, which in essence provide facilities for separate dwelling units. And we believe this may be because past building officials interpreted our definition of family as allowing multiple kitchens so long as all the residents of that structure were related. Our definition of family includes one or more persons of recognized family relationship, maintaining a common household, including domestic help. So if you had in your basement a separate unit for your mother-in-law, your cousin, your aunt, or your nanny, that maybe was permissible. We no longer feel that or interpret the bylaw that way, but the bylaw does clearly allow certain residences to be converted to two-family uses. Use 1.2 allows the alteration and conversion of a single-family dwelling containing at least 6 rooms exclusive of the hall and bathroom existing prior to March 10, 1941 to accommodate not more than 2 families, provided that the exterior design of the structure is not changed from the character of a single-family dwelling. And that use is allowed by special permit in all residential districts and business districts A and B. The zoning board reviewed a total of 4 special permit applications over the last year or so to convert single families to 2 families. 3 of those 4 applications really amounted to an accessory dwelling unit. They were being created so that that family could create space for their extended family, and each of the 4 were approved. Our office does, however, regularly receive requests from homeowners that aren't eligible for that 2-family conversion, either because their home didn't exist as of 1941, or they'd rather install it in a detached structure. We're also finally concerned that the 1941 requirement in particular may not withstand a legal challenge. And the Attorney General decided in 2 cases, Falmouth and Brookline, that similarly structured zoning amendments would be contrary to the uniformity provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 4, because they treat similar properties differently based only on the dates the structures were erected. So it's a related discussion that I understand you guys may be having separately, but it was brought up a number of times with this group as well. So for us to better understand how accessory dwelling units are crafted and then implemented in other communities, staff reviewed more than 80 examples. This group focused in great detail on our peer communities, and Mark Cullings will report out that, right, I kicked you out. We'll report on that data shortly. I'm just going to give a quick overview of kind of the critical decisions that the group made in the document that is before you. I think the most important question that they answered was, why are we creating this bylaw? And in general, it's to create housing options. The actual language from the draft bylaw is to create housing options in single-family neighborhoods that are appropriate for smaller households at a variety of stages, to create opportunity for homeowners who can no longer physically or financially maintain their single-family homes, encourage better utilization and preservation of existing housing stock and accessory structures by expansion of allowed uses, eliminate unpermitted accessory structures to enable the town to monitor construction for code compliance, and finally, protect stability, property values, and residential character of the surrounding neighborhoods. After answering, I think, the why, they were able to answer the remaining questions. Who was another topic that the group spent a lot of time talking about. Like most communities, they decided that it would be best if we limit it to owner-occupied properties. This helps to ensure that the property is well maintained and mitigate any potential negative impacts to neighbors. But only one of the units needs to be owner-occupied. The other unit, it would be unrestricted, so it could be your family. It could be, you know, a friend of the family. It would be otherwise unrestricted. What the units, it's, I think, very important that they be secondary housing units, and they're not true two families. So the group crafted size limitations, I think in part, Eileen, based on Situate's experience. There would be a 900 square foot cap, or 40% of the primary residence, whichever is less. So there really is an attempt to make sure that these have a smaller footprint and thus a smaller impact on the neighborhood. There's other design standards inserted in there that cover parking and provision of services and the overall character of the single-family home. The group decided to propose that it be allowed in all residential districts and business district A and B, similar to our current two-family use. And within the lot, they could be located either in the single-family home, in a newly constructed attached structure, or in a detached accessory structure. And how it would be authorized by a special permit A1, I did catch the end of that. There was some dialogue about whether it should be an A2, and there would be site plan review, and the group ultimately felt that, you know, that the type of use could be handled through a special permit A1 process.
So I think, thank you. Nice presentation. I think one of the things that I heard in terms of a distinction between, let's say, for example, a house that's in the current bylaw allowable to be converted to a two-family is it would be by special permit, but once converted, it doesn't have a sunset clause. It essentially is a two-family. Whereas with the accessory unit, this would be a renewable application by special permit on a 3-year basis of renewability, so that you'd have the accountability that it is in fact being used as permitted. And we've had a lot of conversation about, you know, how we kind of define it in such a way, and we were initially talking about defining it by certain relationships, but I think we've evolved that discussion to think that essentially the dimensional controls and the special permit process gives us that accountability. Okay, I'd like to, if there are any questions for Emily, any further questions for Emily? Thank you. Or,
I have a question.
yeah.
First, I commend all of you because you covered an incredible amount of ground in 3 meetings. So thank you. And, but here's a question I have. So on this owner-occupied requirement, does that hold, and also on this renewable special permit, does that hold for the 2 families that were created under the 3A 1.2 in the past?
Those are, in essence, they'd be, they remain as is. So if they were either grandfathered, so pre-existing non-conforming, or approved under our existing use 1.2, as Gary mentioned, it runs with the land, so those
Right,
can
so
continue to
the
be maintained.
existing 3A 1.2 would remain? Or we would discuss whether the 1941 were
discussed.
still,
Yep.
and whether we want to incorporate it. So my concern, I guess, is that we not restrict something that hasn't been restricted till now, because there hasn't been an ill effect, so, right?
Different, yeah, right now.
So this doesn't
different. This
talk
doesn't cover
about,
those.
this is all accessory
That's correct.
structures.
That's correct. Accessory units, and that you can do it in the main, but also the distinction that you can also do one in an accessory structure. So there's a distinction between an accessory
So
unit.
what's the difference between an accessory unit in your building and a 2-family? Is this,
That's, yeah.
okay.
We've had a long series of discussions on definition. Great. So Mark, would you like to, Mark has done an assessment of peer towns.
To advance.
It's not working, so just if you hit your down arrow, you'll
Okay.
toggle.
All right, good. Well, that's just the, staff provided us at the beginning of this with a study that encompassed, I guess, 80 towns, 75 or 80 towns with accessory bylaw legislation on the books. And it was, there's a lot of documentation there. The Pioneer Institute did the study. They did it in 2004. So we're 10 years downstream, and all of those 80 towns had the legislation on the books in 2004 to try and bring some degree of, get our arms around what the impact on Hingham would be. This town, as I think everybody knows, typically compares itself with a group of other peer communities. And Mary provided me with the list of the communities that are on that peer community list. We added one. Interestingly, Duxbury is not on that list, and I'm not exactly sure why, but we plugged that in. So there are on this list 19 communities that we broke up into twosies and threesies to check with town planners and find out their experiences. So of the 19, what did I just do?
Something very bad.
The computer gods need to come down.
I just.
The gurus.
I used to fly jets.
Hey, Mark? It was number 4, Eileen.
Are we number 20?
We're one of, I think, 20% of towns that don't have an accessory dwelling unit law, bylaw in Massachusetts.
How many of them have the 1941 two-family?
A lot of them have different dates where they grandfathered that, and some of them are in the 50s, some are in the 30s, but a lot of towns had that. I don't know if I have the number.
That would be an important question.
Yeah.
And how many of these towns are sewered?
Good
What
question.
percentage of them
Good
are
question.
sewered? I know Lexington has 130 miles of sewer.
Well,
If you rebooted, Emily? If you rebooted, Emily? Yeah, okay.
So of the 19 towns, 13 of these peer communities have the law on the books. Andover, Canton, Cohasset, Concord, Dedham, Duxbury, Lexington, Milton, Norwell, Rockland, Situate, Weston, and Westwood. 6 do not. That doesn't mean that they've rejected the idea. What it means is they haven't considered it. Those towns are Braintree, Hull, Marblehead, Needham, Wellesley, and Weymouth. So 13 do and 6 don't. The commonalities, all of the towns that do have the special permit process. Most have duration limits to the special permit. All require that retained neighborhood character phrase that we were talking about. All require owner occupancy. All limit ADUs to 1 per building lot in residential zones. There's one community that splits, there's a commercial district and they have slightly different regulations. Almost all require building and occupancy permits. Almost all expire on the sale of the property. Most have renewal provisions. The bedroom restrictions to the ADUs are varied. Occupancy, most towns do not restrict who can live in them. Detached units, 4 of the communities allow detached units to have ADUs in them. 7 don't, and one is one we don't know. Most allow ADUs in existing buildings only. Parking, most require 1 space per unit. Most prohibit lodgers or boarders, and some, very few, limit the total number of ADUs as a percentage of the single-family housing stock. So that's that in a nutshell, and I've got, we can get you hard copies of this, but we've also prepared a spreadsheet that has a little bit more detail in it, and you can take a look at. That's it in a nutshell.
Mark, of the towns that have the accessory units, there was also some statistics on how many ultimately applied for units in the town, in terms of a very small number of actuals. Could you talk about that?
Well, generally speaking, the demand for the accessory units in all of the towns we surveyed is quite light. It's a very targeted population group within the cohort, within the towns that actually have a need for something like this, and just generally speaking, and I'd like some of the others, members of the committee to speak to this as well. What we've found in surveying all of these communities, that the level of difficulties that communities are reporting is very light. I mean, it's just not an issue. When we were talking about this before, I sort of came up with the Free Street, Main Street light. Lots of concern. It's going to change everything, and ultimately the light went in and things are better. So, but again, I don't want to hog this mic. This is not my committee.
One of the things I was going to ask the committee members is, all of us had brought to this committee different areas of expertise and different experiences, and I'm wondering if on the committee, if the rest of the committee members might want to share some of the issues or some of the things that you brought to the discussion, which were concerns that you saw as part of this proposal.
So I think one of our concerns was unintended consequences. What happens if somebody builds one of these apartments, the property gets sold, and then it turns into a rental unit? Could the neighborhood and the character and the impact upon all the abutters change? And so we were very concerned to make sure that it accomplished the goals of allowing affordability and the convenience of being able to stay in your house. And that goes, by the way, for both elderly populations and younger populations. So people who have kids who are graduating who might not want to move out right away for financial reasons, having nannies in a house, having a caregiver, a nursing aide, something like that. So that was a big issue for us. And I think we've addressed, virtually every point on that list.
But when you say not become a rental unit, say you're renting the unit to your mother, I mean, I don't understand the distinction between it,
A
bec-
rental unit.
the main property becoming a rental unit.
Or the accessory unit, in the sense that, first of all, it had to be owner occupied, right? So there's some sort of feeling of you know, wanting to keep it up. But it was really to prevent lots of cars coming into driveways, renters switching out, in and out all the time, and that would change the character of the residential neighborhood. I think that was the concern.
And what have you presented to mitigate that or to address that, the renewal?
Yeah, so a number of things. One was the size. That was ultimately the big issue for us, is the footprint, the 900 square feet or 40% or smaller. Number two, utilities. So it has to have a single utility bill so that it doesn't easily, you know, become a rental unit. Parking was another big issue, right? I think one car, right?
Typically.
Boy, what was the other thing?
One car for the ADU.
Right, exactly, yes.
The entrances.
Yes, entrances had to be on the side or the back, if it was the main dwelling. And the zoning board ultimately has, I think I don't know what the right word is, but approval, whether or not this fits the character of the neighborhood based upon all the other pre-existing zoning laws that we have.
So do you think for us to consider this bylaw, you know, in this round, right? Because you know what the process is next. We would go to hearings, public hearings, and then go to town meeting with it. Do you think that we have to consider 3A 1.2 at the same time? Because 3A 1.2 allows for rentals, allows for a front door, you know, wherever it has been, you know, so it's a little bit, there's a little bit of a contradiction in those two.
But I think it's only for pre-1941 housing?
Right, but so say I have a pre-1941 house and now I want to put an ADU in it, which of the two bylaws governs me?
Well, let me, there's an awful lot of conflation of two families and accessory units. Pardon me?
What's the difference?
The difference is pretty simple. A two-family is a deeded restriction. It runs with the property. An accessory unit is a temporary unit. It does not run with the property. It terminates upon the sale of the property. The special permit can be reapplied for by the new tenant. But they're just different animals. And so your particular situation, you have two options. If this bylaw is enacted, by right, you can convert your house into a legal two-family and watch your property value go down when it does that. Or, well, it's true. It's when single-family homes are converted into legal two-families, typically the value of the overall value of the property goes down because it becomes a business arrangement. It's no longer a single-family house.
I have no experience in that regard, so I can't comment on it. But okay, so I can if I live in a pre-1941 house right now, I could choose. I could call it a two-family, or I could call it an ADU, depending on what my purposes are.
You can apply for a special permit for an accessory unit, and again, it's a temporary unit while you have the need for it. Then you can use it as that. Have someone in it. When that need is gone, or if you sell the house, the special permit terminates. The next owner may not want one and need not carry it.
Say they want to continue it, what's the burden on, what are the criteria for, so now it still is the same property, is there some way they couldn't fail to get the A1? Like, what would they have to do to not get it?
That's up to you all. That's
ZBA, I would guess.
Yes, I'm sorry, that's right. But that's the tripwire, the ending, the built-in regulation to differentiate it between a two-family, a legal two-family.
And it's a special permit process.
It's not a by right process, so you would have to go in there and convince the permit granting authority that what you were proposing was within the requirements of the bylaw.
But
And
as
so-
long as, I mean, I haven't looked at this carefully,
Sure.
clearly, but as long as those criteria are pretty objective ones, what, and the house, you know, I buy somebody's house who has one of these, is it, do I have to go to a you know, can it be just an administrative, yes, nothing has changed, you can have this?
What you have before you is a draft. It's something to react to and modify or whatever. As we talked about it, we talked about sending an affidavit, a renewal upon an application, writing a letter to the ZBA. I think it was the committee's, that we agreed that the new applicant, the new owner, should apply for a new special permit and go through the.
Yeah.
And the permit goes with the owner, it does not go with the land?
Whereas the two-family, pre-1941, it would go with the land.
Right.
So that's a pretty big distinction. The other thing that came up, which was, and I was really impressed with the ability of the committee to talk about a lot of complex issues in a relatively compressed amount of time, because there's a lot of issues involved, and I think our summary draft is a pretty good summary of those, which I think is a good stepping off point for the planning board. What we were also looking at is how do we protect the abutters? Because in a single-family residential district, the concern that was raised is that people would move into a single-family residential district with the expectation that they're living in that kind of a district. And so if one of these, if accessory dwelling unit is proposed, we wanted to make very sure that that was supportive of the single-family character of that neighborhood. And so tailoring this in terms of how the building is configured, what the size of the units are, how the utilities are metered, is all based on single-family with a subordinate unit. It's not based on an equal two-unit building. And we want to be very clear to make that distinction, because in certain neighborhoods, which are, let's say, downtown, where you're in an overlay district, it might be a little different because you have a mixed kind of set of uses. You've got retail and you've got housing, whereas in a traditional residential neighborhood, the character overwhelmingly is the single-family house. And that was, and what we saw in terms of, this was essentially a public request initiative that came to the planning board earlier than July, when it was requested that we talk about this year. And what I've seen in terms of the kind of people, both in Hingham, that are interested in this, and the specifics of the people who would be applicants, and the applicants in all of our peer towns, is that basically they wanted to have a subordinate unit in the house, but they wanted to maintain their single-family lifestyle, which they have had for whatever number of years. They wanted to be able to sustain that, and this is a flexibility option within the house to be able to do that without changing the character of the house. So it's not done for investment. Really the motivation on this was flexibility, and it was support of a single-family character.
That's within the house.
Within the house, yes.
No, but this could be in a barn.
No, you could do it in an accessory structure.
That's a big difference.
It is a big difference.
Huge.
So this says that it could be in the existing house, Camille, or in a accessory building. But you bring up a good question, which is, did you run this by, okay, so at the end, you mentioned the requirements of Title V. So do you think the Board of Health, maybe we should send this?
Bruce hasn't set.
Oh, awesome. Oh, okay.
But how many buildings, I mean, are gonna qualify for this? The small little houses that have the people that might need
Camille, could you come to the
assistance,
Could you come to the mic, Camille, identify yourself?
that might need the financial assistance, aren't on lots that can hold these.
Well,
I mean, we're talking about the barns on Main Street. That's what we're talking about here.
well, one of the things there are two constraints to answer your question and to answer your earlier question. We established a minimum size of the accessory unit, and we discussed a minimum size of the house, and I'm not sure if we entered that into our list. We were originally talking about a house size of about 1,200, or was it 1,400 square feet? I'm trying to remember what the, 1,200 square feet. So there was a minimum single-family house size, and then within it, there was a maximum accessory unit size. But the other constraint on this is bedroom count, because Bruce Capman explained Title V and the requirement that we could not supersede the current constraints of the septic system if the house was on septic, which, you know, if you have a 3-bedroom allocation on septic, or if you have a 4-bedroom.
Almost for a 3-bedroom house.
That's right. So there.
Where are you gonna find that in Hingham?
Well, can we sort of go, I think we're getting into an awful lot of details here. Yeah, and it's a, yeah, they are, and it's important, but just maybe just step back a little bit and why this came about. I got interested in this over the summer when my younger daughter and her husband were in the house, and they're interested in taking over my house, which is large. I'm alone, and it's a big house, and I love it. And they said, Dad, if we bought the house, can we make an apartment for you on the property and you live here? And I said no, and they were surprised, and they said why? And I said because the town won't let me, and the town won't. This is this town's zoning bylaws for housing and property owners are pretty constrained, and they have not changed since 1941. The population of the town is changing. We see the aging demographics. We see the opportunity to make to add to the flexibility of property owners in the town. And in the investigation that we did in the research, I had a very interesting and lengthy conversation with the town planner in Weston. And that woman was previously, before she went to Westland, was the city planner in Wilmington, and she lives in Newburyport, and wrote the accessory bylaw in Newbury. And what she brought up in the towns of Newburyport and Newbury and in Weston is, in a town that values its historic structures, one of the things that allowing accessory units in accessory buildings, outbuildings, increases the chance that a valuable historical outbuilding doesn't fall into disrepair. It gives a property owner yet another opportunity to preserve something that might otherwise be lost. So anyway, there are, Camille, I was reminded of that. Mrs. Colantonio brought up the issue of barns, and that's exactly right.
Can you explain why you can't put a unit in today? The zoning issue, the kitchen thing? Right? You can't.
Yeah, well, you can't. You can have everything but a kitchen. You can.
You
Yes.
can have a 2-family in your house, Mark.
I know you can, but that becomes.
You can put a unit in there.
I can do that, but I choose not to, because that turns it into a deeded 2-family, not a temporary temporary
You can
unit.
take out the kitchen afterwards.
Okay, it's not a 2-family. It's a different deal.
You could, but the distinction that was made is that if it's a deeded 2-family and it runs with the land, it will always be a 2-family.
That's not true. They
Well-
get converted all the time back to single family.
No, they do, but I'm saying the construct, the legal construct would say that it would typically stay as a 2-family because it doesn't have to be reviewed on a regular basis in terms of special permit. The idea here was that it would be temporary in that it was renewable every 3 years, so you'd have to reinstate it every 3 years, so that if it changed significantly, that would be the safeguard where it wouldn't become a 2-family. Because there are some areas that people don't want 2 families. We've heard a lot on the committee, we've heard a lot of feedback about people don't want to have 2-family zoning.
And you think they want apartments and barns?
Well, I'm not saying it's either
Yes.
or, but.
I think they do.
Well, there's a couple of other, in terms of the demographics, there's a couple of other statistics that we've heard. We've heard yes, there are the demographics where the town, the senior citizen, the population, the senior citizens is a high percentage of the town, and so that this is a model of flexibility. We've also heard in the town where there's a decent percentage of the town are adult children who are basically living at home for a whole host of reasons, whether they're economic. It's a different time than it was when I was younger, and so there's a demand there too, and there's a question of, again, flexibility. True, there's a relationship, but in the old days, when I grew up, you had 3 generations living in the same house, and it wasn't this kind of as independent as it is now. But this is just what we're hearing, and I'm not making any value judgments, but the idea was to be able to have some flexibility.
But we've built so many apartments. Microphone, please. We have built so many apartments and alternatives for people that want to downsize in the past 20 years. I mean, think of it. Start at one end of Hingham, go to the other. All those places, there are alternatives. And I don't understand the difference between a two-family. I'm sorry, I can't get it, between that and an ADU. Mark can put an apartment in his house. He can make it the size he wants. And he can rip out that kitchen, just like he's going to rip out the kitchen of the barn later. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me to open another can of worms that hasn't really, I know you guys worked hard on it, I listened to all this stuff, but I just think there's a lot more before you go and change something as significant as having one house on one lot to allowing 2 on one lot, that you need to really think about the consequences before they happen.
Wait, can I ask you something? But you can have 2 on one lot right now. Like you just said, Mark could put in 2, and it hasn't really been a problem.
Not two separate structure units is what I'm talking about with the barns.
Like, I would think as far as can you come back just and say what's the concern? Because if the concern is the density, I think that the existing bylaw that allows 2 full families living in on one lot, because you turn your house into a 2-family, right? So you have 2 full families. That seems more dense to me than allowing someone to put a maximum 900 square foot unit over their garage in a structure that's already there. It seems more dense the way the bylaw's written now than it would allowing this ADU.
Well, I just think that, you drive down Main Street and every single house has a barn.
Right, but they
And
all
they're
be
just
2 families also.
Well, but they can't be in the barn.
But I'm just saying is in the barn, it could be a 900 square foot, 1-person, small thing. In their house, those houses are big on Main Street, so those could all be 2-family houses.
If they chose to, but apparently it's not a desirable thing to do.
why
So
would the
people aren't
barn be
going to.
I'm just saying, why would that barn be worse than this?
I just think that you're adding, you're just adding more. You're taking something that's always been in Hingham. There's one dwelling unit, basically. I don't know how you define, well, I don't know how, one structure that's inhabited. And now having 2 inhabited structures, I guess is what I'm saying.
But everybody uses their barns. I mean, I'm not trying to
I know,
I'm just saying,
I know.
like preparing for town meeting, what's gonna be the conversation
Well,
is,
I'm just-
because everybody can use their
I
barns
just think-
as recreation buildings, all of that, so they're.
Right,
you
but
can
they're
use
not
it.
renting them out.
Right now, I don't think
That the bylaw allows a separate residential unit in a barn.
Exactly.
I think it does allow,
can't have a
pre-1941, it allows a separate unit. Only in a pre-1941 house, it allows a
that's
separate unit
all of Main
in the
Street.
house,
And
but
I
not
think-
in the barn,
And I
yes.
think you can operate a business out of the barn currently. You just can't live there.
The bylaw was changed.
Probably, 10 years ago, when we talked about commercially business uses and accessory structures, and originally the barn had to be attached to the house to do that, but I think now it's a detached structure, which is the barn. You can have a business in it as long as it's no more than 3 employees or something like that. There are constraints on
Yeah,
it.
you just can't live there.
One of the things I'd like to address, Camille, is, yes, the houses built before 1941 have an option for 2-family. What about the rest of the houses in town? For example, if your house was built in 1965 and you have a 10-room house and you want to then put an ADU in, you can't do a two-family, but you might be able to do an ADU demonstrating.
I do understand that, yeah.
Yeah, so this will help the other dwellings that are built after 1941.
The only thing I'd say to that is I bet you most of the houses after 1965 don't have any room on their
Microphone.
Title V because there's not a developer that didn't.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Not a developer that didn't, develop and put in as many bedrooms as he could to sell that house. And I just think that Hingham's biggest problem is the water and the amount of houses on septic here. And I just think that you're asking for trouble.
We heard from a homeowner in South Hingham who has a 1965 house, and it's a raised ranch type of a house with 4 bedrooms, 2-car garage. And she would like to live in a small unit in the house, and she'd like to have her children move into the house. And so in order to do that, she has a 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom maximum capacity on her septic system. So with that accessory unit special permit, she'd have to remove one of the bedrooms, and she'd have 2 bedrooms for the children, and she'd have 1 for herself. I mean, that's essentially the septic would constrain it in that type of a situation.
I just worry about the policing of that, I really do. The minute the guy's out of the driveway, we know what happens. The wall goes back up and the door goes on, and I just think you need to think about Hingham's watershed and the issues with that. And if you start having these accessory dwelling units pop up in all these barns, and then what happens when the guy, he goes and he's got 2 acres, and he comes and he gets his permit, and he says, I want to put in an accessory dwelling unit. Well, great, you've got, 2.5 acres, you can do this. We can let you put this in the barn. Then he comes along, and after he's gotten that, he subdivides his land 2 years later. And now that he's got 1 acre, that he's got this accessory dwelling unit barn sitting on. How are you going to police that?
But I think, like you said, the Title V is a constraint. So the health, I don't know how the health department.
Under Title V, because he has 2 acres, then he decides to subdivide the
count,
property.
right? They still count bedrooms, and they say, well, no, now you're out of compliance.
No, the one acre
What, the
lot
one
he
with
sells.
everything on it. So he,
It's my understanding in a situation like that you could not, if he were permitted for a 5-bedroom, he would have to keep enough land to, in other words, $12,500 per bedroom to keep the amount of land that went along with the septic. Again, it is all under the Title V auspices.
Under the special permit process, once a property, it's an interesting question on the subdivision of property down the road. Once a property, let's say, obtains a special permit for the accessory unit, that goes with the ownership of that property under the current proposal. So if that ownership changes and the property is subdivided and part of the property goes into a new ownership situation, then it seems to me then the special permit expires. And under that situation, then you couldn't then subdivide. You couldn't increase the density.
I think what Camille is
Oh,
talking
maybe
about
I'm-
here is the original owner staying with a portion of it and
Oh, I
selling
see.
off a portion of it.
Nice, I didn't see that. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
So, and not that I've been privy to this kind of thing, but the logical way that it would work, again, the lot that was originally permitted with that septic, whether it be 4 or 5 bedrooms, he would have to retain that in order to support that many bedrooms. Or he would have his Title V permitting possibly, and I don't know this reduced, but you have to comply with 12,500 square feet per bedroom.
so that's a good question for Bruce Capman, sort of going forward with this, to have kind of the Board of Health assurance or not, that this is something that's good for under their, regulations.
Well, currently, the Board of Health comes in is somehow involved even in two families or rentals, things like that. He's somehow involved in overviewing that kind of thing. So he's familiar with, the vehicles.
I think one of the things you have to put into context is we called about 20 towns to see what had happened during the last 10 years with these ADU units, and more specifically, how many of these are permitted every year. So if you looked at peer towns, which have about 9,000 to 10,000 housing units like Hingham, we're looking at about 6 units a year on average. So it's not going to overwhelm the town from what we've seen from other peer towns. I mean, there just is no evidence at this point.
In Westwood, pardon me, they have 5,200 units. They've been, again, let me go back to this peer survey of 19 towns and a 2004 study. There is a lengthy history of experience within these towns, towns that I think we're proud to compare ourselves with. And they report minimal difficulties with them and a very limited annual demand. And there is a washing out. There is, I think it was Laura Marwell who brought up, it was not Cohasset, I'm sorry, it was Situate. It was Situate with the experience that as applicants come in for accessory units, there are, on the other end, there are applicants, or not applicants, but there are accessory units that are being converted back into the single family, just one dwelling. Something hasn't been brought up here, and that's public safety. And it was brought up at one of our earlier meetings. The little, not dirty little secret, but there is a common belief among town officials that there are a whole heck of a lot of illegal accessory units in this town. And in the event of a fire, an emergency in a house, without any record of who is actually living in the house, there's an issue of some concern, I think, to everyone. And again, increasing the flexibility, it's not just for aging people, as Gary has pointed out, and others. I got some feedback from a couple with a special needs daughter who needs constant care, and they struggle with how to. They want their daughter in their house, and they need nursing help for her, and they struggle with how to comply with the Hingham bylaws to have that happen. Currently, they can't, and so that's another sidelight. There are all kinds of sidelights, and again, in the special permitting phase requirement to ask people to come before your board or the zoning board of appeals and agree to put in a small unit, agree that it's going to expire at the end of 3 years unless they renew it, it's not a large target cohort of people in the community.
One of the questions we asked when we called the individual towns was, did you have any unintended consequences? And Situate was one of the people that I talked to, and they did have the unintended consequence of the auxiliary unit that was detached being larger than what they anticipated. So they are, as you said, proposing an amendment this year at their town meeting to do the 900 square feet or 40% of the primary building, or less.
Whichever is greater.
Or less.
Whichever is
less.
Whichever is smaller.
So it would not ever be larger than 900 feet. So that's what they're intending to do. And I'm.
Not much more than the Bradley Woods house.
It's it's less. It's less.
100 square feet.
Yeah, 1,000 to 1,200. Yeah, in Cohasset, they have one ADU unit. I don't have my spreadsheet. I didn't get to go home from work to bring all of that, I'm sorry. But that's all they had apply. They did it a little bit, not totally, but a little bit as a housekeeping mechanism too, because they know they have units that are not registered with the town. And they were hoping to, all right, let's alert, the fire department, so on and so forth. And people haven't come up. And, well, because they have to go through a process. So what that goes to is that we aren't going to be inundated just based on the 20 towns we've talked to. I wish I could say the exact number, and I'm fearful of quoting the wrong number, but for Situate, it was much larger than Cohasset, but it was 50 to 70 for the whole town.
I would like to know how many could be in Hingham, if anyone can even answer that question. How many could there be? How many could apply for this?
Well, the whole town could apply.
Well, not every, not,
If you were to sort, the town has about 9,000 households, I believe, plus or minus 8,500 to 9,000 houses. And if you were to look at houses in terms of the percentages, the houses built from the 60s on, I would say the 50s, post-World War II on, are generally speaking smaller houses, unless you're talking about the ones in the last 10 years, the larger McMansions. But it seems to me that if there's a certain percentage that could be determined as to what, by size, if size is the limiting factor in terms of the bedroom count or the square footage size, one could do an assessment of the houses of that size. Then there are the houses, I think if you look pre-1941, before World War II, and back, then the houses are larger, but there are fewer of them. So, one could find a percentage and a number of how that was spread. One of the things I wanted to ask Camille is in terms of, right now, when we're talking about one primary house, single-family house on one lot with a subordinate unit, I'm trying to get a sense in terms of your read and your concerns. If the unit, do you have a distinction or either way, whether it's the second, is it in the house or in the barn? Is the accessory building?
It's the idea of having, this carte blanche thing out there that, 900 square feet, then it gets a little bigger. And it just becomes 2 dwelling units on a property. And, gone are the beautiful old barns with the nice smelling interiors. They're all going to be pool houses that get a kitchen in them, and,
But they can do that now.
they can have the second kitchen.
If they have a pool house, they can.
No,
they
I've
do.
been told that they can't, that makes it the stove. They can have a stove in it.
I thought they couldn't have the shower. They couldn't have the bathroom.
There's something they can have.
Is it the shower?
That's correct, unless it's the pool.
I think we should reread our accessory unit bylaw, because I've seen, I can think of 3 off the top of my head because they have a pool, they have a full house,
Right.
so.
And the stove's in.
one of the other things, a point that I wanted to make is that not every property in town will be able to have one. It isn't for everyone.
Obviously not.
Well,
They're
but,
not on big enough lots.
but that's right.
I mean,
And,
half of them wouldn't,
well,
there are 3 bedrooms that couldn't be 3 bedrooms today.
I guess my question would be, is this a reason not to do it for the town as a
I'm wondering
whole?
who we're doing it for. I don't think we're doing it for the people that can't afford and need to have their families in with them. I don't think that that's what's gonna happen.
But there are people that I have spoken with who live in large homes and can't afford to stay in those homes. And so, because they've retired and they have an opportunity to stay in that home in an ADU if they can sell their home to their children. So it's not helping people who have problems you know, I thought Emily gave a great presentation about the number of families who are cost burdened by their, I don't think that this is intended to help them specifically. It sounds like it's here to create options for people, but it's not affordable housing.
I guess my feeling is there's an option there. You can go back to the 1941 with these big houses. I've been fighting this for 40 years in Hingham. I just hate to see all the old barns turned into things that will eventually become a separate dwelling unit. It's an ADU today. 50 years down the road it'll be, and it's just, I don't think it's the right thing to do. Hingham's managed to keep these beautiful barns, and they are beautiful.
And a lot of them have apartments in them.
Well,
They do.
They do.
They
So
do.
Camille, is your sense that if it was started out in just the house and not the accessory unit, what would you think of that consideration?
I'm much more in favor of that. I just don't see people going in. What are you going to do with it when the person leaves in 3 years? You're going to go rip all the sheetrock out and the central air and it's not going to happen. Whereas if it's in the house and you decide you want to take out the kitchen, then you do that. And you turn it's back to a single family.
But I mean, from a conservation perspective, I think that's a big waste of money then. Like, better put it over there where it's not gonna get ripped out, but now you're gonna put in a kitchen that 3 years from now is gonna get ripped out.
That buys the house the next
But if you
time.
read,
You think people are really gonna rip this stuff out?
my reading of this is that it's pretty objective, but anyway, I don't know that we wanna go into all the detail tonight, but you bring up good points.
But by the way, if they do convert a barn into a house, that barn's gonna stay cosmetically the same in perpetuity, and there'll be an impetus to maintain that. It's just the inside won't look the same.
Nicely for 200 years if you drive down Main Street. I haven't seen them falling down or.
It is.
We've done a pretty good job all these years. I think that to make such a drastic change in our zoning bylaw so quickly. I mean, you said it came up in July. You had your first meeting in October. I know you've worked hard.
You said you've been fighting this for 40 years. This is not coming up in July for the first time.
Okay. Using barns as accessory units, I've been fighting for 40 years. Two-family, whatever you want to call them, the same thing. Taking a barn and converting it into housing. That's what I've been fighting.
I watched Situate talk about this for decades. And I think one of the things that Situate dealt with was a lot of the properties along the water had boathouses. And when those were originally seasonal residences, as Situate's demographics changed and those became full-time residents, those became other structures. Rental homes where the children and their children's children lived. And Situate really needed to bring those in compliance. And I think it's worked pretty well in Situate. And I think there probably have been unintended consequences where those boathouses became larger and larger, and Situate's sort of reeling that in. But I think it's worked out pretty well in Situate, and it seems to me it would work well here in Hingham.
That was the sum and substance of what we got just in talking to the peer towns. There's language in here, Camille, that talks about, as part of the permitting process, that the maintaining the exterior, the flavor of the neighborhood would be vital to permitting an ADU. This is not something that is going to come in and by right be given out. It has to comply with that. The committee was very sensitive to maintaining the structure, a barn structure or what have you. So just to let you know that that was not overlooked.
I think that you have to reflect on the fact that the bylaw has to contain specific language that governs how a board is going to make decisions as to whether to permit or not to permit a specific use. And I think you can hear in the discussion this evening that there are numbers of questions that need to be answered before this should go before town meeting, because I think we have the responsibility to the citizens of the town to explain to them in some detail as to what is actually going to be the consequence of this action. This is not similar to other articles that go before town meeting under zoning, because it's going to affect or potentially affect the majority of the citizens of the town. Most of us live in single-family residential areas and would be concerned about what our neighbor is going to be doing next door and how that's going to impact us. And one of the things that I've had a concern about and will continue to speak about is whether or not having a special permit without a site plan review of how the yard of the property may be altered needs to be addressed, because the impacts to the neighbors are going to be not in the interior of the building, but the exterior.
That is part of the language that was inserted, but that will be massaged.
SA1 special permit.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about the site plan, I'm talking about the exterior, the property, that.
But it has to be specific to what
I hear you.
we're governing. It can't be general language.
So is this on the, Mary, is this on the selectmen's warrant article list?
The planning board will be voting a week from tonight about which bylaws to send upstairs for the selectmen. So I would say that you haven't voted yet.
Thank you.
Right, now
So did the committee, I'm assuming the committee voted on this and endorsed it, or is it just a draft?
the committee basically met a fourth time tonight, and we reviewed
the draft that was initiated from our last meeting a week and a half ago. And we made some changes to that. And I think we have not formally voted, but on the other hand, I think what we were doing is we were making a report to the planning board about moving forward with this as a recommendation. And what we have not had an opportunity to do is to vet it with the board until tonight, to see, you had an earlier draft, we have this draft, we have the discussion that's ongoing. My sense would be is that I think we've seen a need in the town, and I think what we're trying to figure out is how best to vet this and how best, if it was to be developed into a bylaw for review and a vote from town meeting, should we proceed? I guess my sense from the committee is that we felt that we should proceed relative to moving it forward with the planning board, and then it goes through the next series of public hearings and the due process as to developing it. But there's a lot of work continuing relative to all the feedback that we've been getting about, how specific we write it, and the language, and issues that have come up, that will continue to come up. It's a work in progress at the special hearings, the public hearings. That's how I saw it in terms of reading the committee, the study committee, in terms of what the intent of the study committee was. So I think the recommendation was to put it in front of the planning board and then have the planning board say, okay, based on the discussion that we've had tonight, move forward and vet it through the process. And I would ask the board what your, based on where we are now, what's your sense of when you see the draft and you see what's been submitted and you see the extent of where we are relative to the discussion and what additional ongoing work needs to be done on a bylaw narrative, because there's a lot of work to continue to write it. This is really an outline framework. And so there's a lot more work that needs to be done in the hearings, because we have to take in all the input from the hearings. But my sense was the committee had made a recommendation that we proceed, so I wanted to get a sense of where the board was.
I think they should proceed, and I think it's something that we should take up. Sure.
Bill? Yeah. Judy?
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a lot, it's a great start, but I think there are a lot of questions, like about the Board of Health, about the who are the people downtown, the downstairs, the assessors, you know, sort of getting buy-in and questions and concerns from all areas going into this process, I think is really important. But I think that in 3 meetings, you've come up with a really sort of comprehensive look at a question that has come up every year I've been on the planning board, so I appreciate your putting something forward that we can all have substantive conversation about.
I appreciate the comments from the committee, particularly the work you did outside the committee, and I also appreciate Camille's comments. And
Sure.
troubleshooting, and these are very important issues that we need to
Yeah.
discuss.
Yeah.
So thank you for speaking up.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention, too,
that Sarah Corey, our 5th member of the board, could not be here tonight because there's an illness in the family that she's been concentrating on, so she could not be here, but I did talk with her today and brought her up to date as to where we were on the committee's recommendation and what we would be discussing at the board tonight. And so she's aware, and next meeting, hopefully she can participate.
I might suggest if you decide to go forward that at either at a public hearing or one of your next meetings when we discuss this again, that perhaps you invite the assessor, Rich Nolan, to come and he can speak more directly to, for instance, the property value thing. And, he and I had a brief communication, and I think it would be important for everyone to hear his views.
I'd like to, for our next, or at least for the public hearing, in preparation for the public hearing, I'd like to find out some of the statistics, specifically what Camille was asking in terms of how many houses would be eligible for this in the town. Is there a way we can get a percentage or a base number, a rough number? Or I guess on the flip side of it is how many houses wouldn't be eligible? I don't know if that's data that we can get.
In industrial districts or other districts that they're not permitted in. Otherwise,
Right.
almost all of the housing units in town.
And then the other question I would ask is, in terms of what's currently allowable within the current bylaw under the 2 families, I'll have a clear understanding of that. I know it's pre-1941. I'm not sure if a unattached accessory structure can have if that's the second building on the lot, if a unit can be in that accessory structure with the restriction that the main house is a single-family house, in other words, no more than 2. I'm not sure how that reads. I remember when we were talking about the commercial uses or office uses in an accessory structure, and whether or not that would have to be attached. In other words, if the house is pre-1941 and the barn is attached to the house, is that a different set of parameters? Or if the accessory structure is an independent building from the house, is that another set of parameters? Just so we know what's allowable now, because I'm not sure we all totally understand.
For the business use, it does not need to be attached.
For the business use, it
Does not need to be attached.
But is a residential use allowable currently in an accessory structure? It is not. Not allowed in a detached accessory.
But that bylaw is worth pulling out just to get real clarity on what is allowed and what is not allowed right now in those accessory structures. Because, I mean, Eileen, and Mark, you've probably seen a lot of them that are pretty nice, you know, pretty livable. So I think it would be a great opportunity to educate the public as to what is actually allowed in town.
Right. The other issue too,
there's both sides. There's the preservation aspect of what we found in the accessory structures on the business use is one of the arguments for that is that if there's an economic use for a structure, it will be maintained. If there's not an economic use in a structure, it might not be maintained. That was the argument put forth in the business use in an accessory. My question would be, does that apply to a residential occupancy in an accessory structure? And I'm sensitive to, on the preservation side, I'm sensitive to what Camille is saying in terms of the preservation of, some of the structures in the town as the current use. So I think there's a balance there. they're gonna be two different.
I hesitate to judge who's gonna maintain their property and who's not, based on the use of the property, because, you know, you've all had neighbors that were less than great maintainers of their properties, or engaged in habits or behaviors that were not really easy to live next to, and I don't think that's something that can be judged or guessed based on kind of whether there's an in-law apartment in the house or not.
Well, I was going back to the rationale in the discussions when we were talking about business uses and accessory structures, and that was a very clear distinction that was made. So I'm just going back to that relative to, I'm not saying it's a value judgment on how people approach their houses or their maintenance or the lack thereof. I was saying in terms of a business model. It just came up then, and I thought it was somewhat topical here in terms of our discussion, but I think it goes both ways. There are people who look at the preservation as a very strict, it goes right back to keeping the original use, and then there are people who look at preservation and they talk about an adaptive reuse. So I'm hearing that two different bookends on that. And that's why I just want to make that distinction. But I think it would be good to know what the constraints are now, because, okay. So I guess when is the first public hearing?
The public hearing won't be scheduled. It probably would be in January. The next step moving out is for the planning board to actually formally decide which bylaw provisions are going to refer to the selectmen. That vote will happen next Monday night. After they go upstairs, the selectmen will then send them back downstairs, and we have to schedule a public hearing. The public hearings will likely start fresh right in January.
All right, so we have a week.
The vote next Monday night basically put placeholders up, though. We work the language.
We don't like the word placeholder.
But
yes,
that's what
you're
it is.
correct.
But that's what it is.
Next week is to decide which revisions will move forward and which ones it may not be the year for, much like we did last year.
Are there further questions that we need to look at or issues we need to look at tonight? I was looking at the clock, so I was thinking of trying to.
Me too.
It's an early day tomorrow, but I really appreciate all the input and the feedback and the hard work of the committee. The committee's done a lot of work. It's been a great committee to work with.
Yeah, they have done a lot of work.
Good people.
I've watched them, all the TV stars.
Thanks again.
I read the minutes.